The Psychedelic Report.
Psychedelic drugs
have played their part in America's long, strange trip toward an understanding of mind-altering drugs.
The Psychedelic News.
Leading physicians, scientists, and experts share their wisdom about psychedelic medicines and healing.
50 years ago, psychedelic drugs were at the center of America's counterculture.
The brightest minds in psychedelic medicine. The Psychedelic Report.
We use the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy model that happens to have psychedelic effects that were not predicted when the drug was first developed.
From researchers to investors.
I think the biggest mistake we've made as a culture is the war on drugs.
To physicians to shamans and nonprofit pioneers.
Psychedelic drugs.
Recent research suggests some of them could have legitimate uses.
The Psychedelic News
brings you diverse perspectives from the front lines of this exciting movement. The Psychedelic Report.
The Psychedelic Report was brought to you by Apollo Neuroscience and produced by Future Medicine Media. Welcome to the Psychedelic Report, your single source of truth for the psychedelic news. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Rabin. I'm a neuroscientist and psychiatrist trained in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy as well as MDMA-assisted therapy. This is a very special live recording of the Psychedelic Report, which is your single source of truth for the psychedelic news. And it's the only psychedelic news show that is bi-weekly. And first off, you're all wearing your Apollo devices. And for those who are not familiar with Apollo, Apollo is a technology that came from my work in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh, mostly between 2013 and 2018, because we were trying to treat PTSD, just like what we're doing in the MAPS trials with MDMA. And there haven't been a lot of good treatments for PTSD in a very long time, which is why we're so interested in MDMA and seeing these incredible results where people are getting better long term. We thought, well, how do these techniques work? And what is in common between the tools that people like Manoj teach, like with breathwork and mindfulness and meditation, and the tools that we use like ketamine? And how do those augment and help us get to states of healing more quickly and really remind us that the source of healing comes from within us? And so Apollo was a tool that came out of that work by trying to use vibration, sound waves, to deliver a stimulus to the body, something soothing that reminds us of how to be embodied. So how to be here at any time. And that's really the core of what we'll talk about with the practice of meditation and mindfulness, is bringing yourself back to present, to center, to the moment, and any moment, not just when you're sitting and practicing like we're going to do today. So first off, I think, this is the science of mindfulness. This is what we're going to talk a lot about, the interface of science and spirituality, which is a big focus of Manoj Diaz's work. And you are so gracious to host us here in your studio that you co-founded and VP of Mindfulness. Thank you so much to you and your whole team for making this incredible event, and to the folks at Wonder Sciences and WonderMed for sponsoring with us, and the whole Apollo team for making this possible. So really appreciate having you. And could you start out by leading us through a little bit of a grounding exercise to give people the feeling of what it is we're going to do today?
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, I feel like my work's already done with this thing. Like, we don't need to do it. But I'd love to lead a really short practice to get us into our body, as Dave said. So wherever you are, please sit in a comfortable position. If you want to lay down, you can relax. Just make sure you don't go to sleep. And if you are sitting, allow your spine to be relatively upright. If you're laying down, then it's okay. You can lay down. And this practice, it's a very short breathing practice. It's actually a 3,000-year-old breathing practice known as Vase breath. It came from the Tibetan Buddhist system. It's a practice to get us out of the mind and into the body. And so we're going to dance between a little bit of visualization and then a little bit of physiological work with the breath. So you can keep your eyes open for the first one if you like. I want you to visualize just the crown of your head, just a few centimeters above the crown of your head. And in a moment, I'm going to invite you to visualize all the energy, all the stress, the thinking, everything going on in the crown of your head. In a moment, I'm going to invite you to visualize yourself breathing that all the way down into the belly. So when I say so, with your mouth closed, do that now. Slow, deep breath in all the way down from the crown of your head. Fill up the belly. And then hold the breath at the end of your inhale. Let your belly expand like a balloon for 5, 4, 3, 2. With your mouth closed on 1, gently exhale. Again, breathe in like you're inflating a balloon from the crown of your head. Visualize the head dropping into the body. Hold the breath at the inhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Gently exhale, draw the belly into the spine. We're going to do that 3 more times. Slow, deep breath in. Hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Do it 2 more times to your own timing. And then do 1 more round. Visualization is important. It's a way of taking us out of the cognition of this moment and into the feeling tone of the experience, into our senses. And at the end of your 5th round, you can slowly begin to open the eyes. Or you can listen to us the whole time with your eyes closed. That's fine. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to do that.
Thank you. And I think that reminds me of why we're all here, right? Because as my wife, Catherine, sitting in the front row, who's my better half and the CEO and co-founder of Apollo, says, it's because of this feeling, right? It's this feeling that we get when we are embodied, when we're really connected to ourselves and therefore connected to each other, recognizing we're all human, we're all here to live and have good lives and to feel joy, and that we have the ability to do that for ourselves and for each other. So thanks for that reminder.
Thank you.
And I'm really excited to be here with my 2 special guests today. On my left, Lauren Swanson. Lauren is the Director of Patient Care for WonderMed, and WonderMed and Wonder Sciences is our sponsor for the event. And you trained as a physician assistant at USC and right here in LA, which is a really great program. And you have extensive experience in ketamine assisted therapy.
Yes.
It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
And for those who are not that familiar with ketamine therapy yet, this is a really exciting topic. I'm also a trained ketamine therapist, and thinking about, again, the science of mindfulness. We're here to talk about this interface between science and spirituality. Of course, for the Erewhon Lifestyle Collective launch that's coming, that this is really one of the first medicines that's entered ketamine into the Western clinical world as a legal psychedelic medicine that helps us to access very powerful states of spiritual healing. And it's not very well understood, which is really interesting, but it is very safe when used properly. And so we're here to talk a lot about that and about this really interesting intersection between science and spirit that can be accessed through different clinical and medicinal tools that we have, ketamine being one of our specialties. And then, of course, psychedelic states are not unique to things that we access with medicine. Psychedelic means to reveal the mind, and psyche means mind, and delos means to show or to reveal. So what we're really talking about is experiencing a situation or a state where we are able to look under the hood of our consciousness and see what's down there. And the way that we all have been there, whether you've taken a psychedelic medicine or not, is in our dreams. Right? In our dreams, our ego, self-protective brain is safe enough to just kind of take a break. And then all of a sudden we enter into this amazing and often beautiful subconscious world. And sometimes it's also scary. And so dreams are the way that we have all experienced this. And then there are the controlled intentional practices that Manoj Diaz has been studying and sharing with this community for a long time at Open, in this gorgeous space, which in and of itself is very soothing environment. And you, as I said earlier, you're the co-founder and VP of mindfulness here at Open. And you were brought up in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, correct?
Yeah. I was actually born in Sri Lanka a very long time ago. I'm actually 75 years old. But it's the meditation that keeps
you look great.
Yeah, thanks. But no, I was born into a Buddhist family, being surrounded by it. But it was very much from the perspective of spirituality and religion at that point.
Can you tell us a little bit about, I know in your recent book, you talk about how you got into this practice of mindfulness and meditation. Right. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as you can probably tell by my accent, I'm Australian. So I moved to Australia when I was 5 years old. And prior to that, growing up in Sri Lanka, I was surrounded by, temples, monasteries. It was very much a community feel. And there was a monastery right next to my house. So Buddhism, spirituality, a lot of meditation was around me from a young age. But then when I moved to Australia, it really wasn't around me at all. And then at some point in my 20s, early 20s, I was working in marketing and advertising. Didn't really meditate. Actually, I didn't meditate at all, to be honest. But I had a pretty serious panic attack at work. And, at this point, it was about 2 years that I was out of work. I was going through all kinds of physical, mental, emotional suffering at that point. And tried all of the different therapies at that point, including medication, developed an addiction to some stuff. And it was a really dark time. And then it was one day a friend invited me to go to a yoga class. And I actually said, I don't own any Lululemon. I can't go there. And he's like, no, it's fine. Come. And it was actually a meditation class. It was a very small meditation class. There was like 6 or 7 people there. And my teacher, I'm still my teacher to this day, as I walked in, he said to me, I've been waiting for you, which was like my first almost psychedelic experience. I'm like, what? Like, how did you know that? But he essentially sat me down and over the course of 15 years, he's been teaching me to really look at the mind and really understand the mind. So Buddhist meditation was my first exploration of that. Then we started to explore yoga, and then eventually it became breathwork.
That's really exciting. I mean, it's such an interesting path because I think unlike most of the rest of us, I don't know about everybody here, but I'd never learned anything about intentional breathing at all growing up, or meditation or mindfulness. It was just so foreign to me. And learning it as an adult was so hard, I think often because I never learned how to do that kind of thing, or even learn that it was important. Like when I grew up, I had in large part, medical oriented, Western medical oriented family. And, everybody's just tells you, you're going to breathe on your own, right? You don't need to worry about it. The body does its thing. Dreams aren't real, right? All this stuff that there's so much more to it than that. And these practices that you're talking about, especially some of these Buddhist practices and some of the other practices that stem back to like ancient yogic traditions and Ayurvedic traditions. I mean, these are like thousands of year old practices for effectively getting us into psychedelic states and healing states of our mind, body, spirit, which is so fascinating. And they've lived on to this day.
Yeah. And it's really exciting to see, breathwork is having a moment right now. So many people, they call it breathwork bros. Have you heard that term? Because I feel like my Instagram is just filled with close your mouth and tape your mouth and all that. And it's great. It's actually really good. We're learning a lot more about breathing and the physiological benefits of that. But these things have been around for a long, long time. And I feel like popular culture these days needs both sides of the argument, and they need to understand the science of it to actually think that it's worth investing in or doing. And then eventually they realize, there's actually more to that than the physiological benefits, and they stay. And so it's been really exciting to see the evolution of mindfulness, evolution of these practices, and then also science and research and medicine really catch up to things that we're carrying around with us all day. Like our nostrils are literally there.
Right. Yeah, it's free.
And it's free, yeah.
You're listening to the Psychedelic Report.
Well, that's a good segue, Lauren. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the space and what led you to working with medicines like ketamine?
So I'm a physician assistant, and the majority of my career was actually spent in primary care. So family practice, urgent care, did that for 14 years and saw a lot of people with anxiety and depression. And also, similar to you, growing up, I grew up in Oklahoma, breathwork, meditation was not something that was taught back then, at least. And so really what was in our toolkit, what we learned in medical school, was when someone comes in with depression or anxiety, send them to a therapist, and you can try an SSRI or an SNRI. So these medications, like Prozac and Lexapro that we've all heard of. And so really my story, how I ended up here, I'm now working in psychiatry, and I'm working with ketamine, is that I actually grew burned out of primary care, as so many primary care practitioners do. And actually,
rates ever right now of physician and healthcare provider burnout are higher than ever.
It's very, very difficult. Tragic. It's tragic. And that's a whole other podcast in itself, to be honest. And so then the pandemic hit. I was still in primary care during the pandemic. And then I personally had a health scare that came out of nowhere. It wasn't COVID related, but it was life threatening. Ended up in the hospital for a few days. Came out of that, was released from Cedars here in LA, and it was just like, wow, something needs to change. Like that, my, life is short, life is precious. I've got a beautiful family. Like something's got to change. And so that's really what led me into psychiatry. And I just have the absolute great fortune to work at this company, Wonder Med, where we actually use ketamine for anxiety and depression disorders. And really, I'm so passionate about this because it is a great medicine, but also because I have so many years understanding what else is out there and what these other doctors are trained to use, and didn't even have ketamine as an option back then. In my current position, really what we do is we have oral ketamine. So it's a ketamine that the patient can take at home or with their therapist. And we help doctors, other primary care physicians, or any other doctor who wants to get ketamine into their practice. We help them do that. They use our pharmacy. We help therapists if they're wanting to send a client, and they can collaborate with our team for a customized program. Or if you're just a patient that wants to come in, you can come in and see us. So really with ketamine, though, to answer your question, like it's just the most amazing thing. I haven't worked with some of the other psychedelics that maybe you have, but these patients come and they get relief right away, which is something that I never experienced in my past career. It's so well tolerated. The side effect profile is extremely low. And
there's no 4 to 6 week wait time.
Yeah. They feel better right away, and they don't have to take a pill every day. This is something they do, and they don't have to do it forever. And then you bring into that the component of therapy. So I am trained in ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And that is so important, is bringing in that behavioral component and that intention to your experience to really get that long-term effect.
That's really interesting because you use the word intention, which I wasn't necessarily thinking about going down that path right now. But when we talk about what's in common between the work we're doing, right, whether you're doing a breathwork meditation or whether we're doing a ketamine assisted therapy experience with folks, intention is always so important. Can you talk a little bit about what is intention? Why does it matter? And how does it kind of fit into the mindfulness paradigm?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many expressions of mindfulness, first of all. I think open is a manifestation of us really trying to broaden the definition of mindfulness. When I started studying meditation first, it was in the context of monasteries. Then it was in the context of a lot of Western teachers that were very cognitive in really trying to explain what was happening in the mind. And I think the first thing I said to Dave when I saw him today, I'm like, it's amazing that a neuroscientist is talking about embodiment, because it was the first time I've really heard someone like that talk about it. So it was really wonderful. So intention is the quality of really almost signposting, bringing a sense of direction to our experience. Why are we meditating, first of all, is a question that we can sit and explore probably for hours. Could be doing any number of things, but what's bringing us to meditation? And so for me, I'll speak personally, my intention was to alleviate the suffering I was going through at that point. So I had that intention so clear in my mind that I could endure all the hours of trying to figure out why I couldn't focus on my breath. I'm like, no, I need to do it, And so intention gives us, motivation. It gives us the ability to keep going when, we probably don't want to keep going at times. And it can be a really generating quality within us. And the intention changes over time as well, which is something that's really interesting. It doesn't have to be this one static intention that we work with for the rest of our lives. It morphs and it evolves. For those of you sticking around for the breathwork practice today, you'll start to see how important and how powerful intention can be, especially when we go into certain psychedelic states, which we can get to in meditation. That intention is almost a sense of safety as well.
Yeah, and I think that to even take it one step further, it's not an important component. Intention is probably one of the most important, if not the most important, intention and attention, right? Because when we talk about mindfulness and meditation practices and breathing is so interesting as an ancient practice because it instantly brings our attention back to our bodies, which is embodiment. It's instant embodiment. By just drawing our attention, what we're deciding we're going to allow in, to the breath, which is our life force that sustains us in every moment, the same thing that's still sustaining us, even when we're not thinking about it, just to regain control, we can redirect our attention to that thing. And it's so simple. And of course, that's part of a whole group of things that we can direct our attention to, which is again, is like, what is our, we might call like the window of our consciousness, right? So if you imagine we're aware of lots of things going on right now, hopefully you're paying attention to me and you're not texting. But when you're paying attention to me, what you're paying attention to is like the tip of the iceberg just sticking out of the water. And that tip is all that you know that's going on right now. There's still 100 million more pounds of iceberg underneath the surface that we're not aware of. But you're paying attention to this, what's here right now. So when you take a psychedelic medicine or you practice these different kinds of awareness techniques, it's like creating like little ripples and clarity in the water so that you can start to see, oh, look, there's all this other stuff going on underneath the surface. And then your awareness broadens. And it's really this practice of constantly training our awareness and our attention as a muscle. It's really like attention as a muscle. This is my favorite thing about meditation. It's like you're supposed to deviate. Your thoughts are supposed to distract you, and then the practice is bringing yourself back, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think also you're talking about interoceptive awareness and exteroceptive awareness, where we think that, you know, our meditation practice is just this one thing. But really, as Dave very succinctly alluded to, it's everything. Like the experience of meditation is happening already, but it's where are we giving our attention to? And so, yeah, thank you for that.
And then on the same note, intention is where we focus our human energy. So if you think about it, if we do anything unintentionally, we're literally just dishing out our human energy to things that are often untrue and useless to us. So if we really want to maximize ourselves, we want to grow, we want to get the most out of what it means to be alive in this life, we have to be intentional. And it's a constant practice. We always forget to be intentional. We always get distracted. But every time we can remember, hey, I need to focus my energy on what I want to get out of this experience, not just doing it and going through the motions. All of a sudden you start getting stuff out of your experiences in a much bigger way. And ketamine is interesting, and psychedelics in general, but ketamine for the purposes of this context is interesting because it's only an hour to a 60, 90 minute experience that can be very much guided by the intention that we bring into it, that can then be amplified by the medicine and the safety of the therapy environment. Can you talk a little bit about that, Lauren?
Yes, absolutely. So the medicine itself works, you know, just like if you're doing a one-time meditation, I suppose, you know, it's going to make you feel better. But if you put the intention into it, that's really where the magic happens. And that's really where the healing occurs. And that's where the long-term effects of any psychedelic are really centered in. And so I've seen with my patients, you know, they go in with an intention and they have insight, maybe even during the experience or after the experience. As you said, it's only an hour too. So these people are doing this maybe putting an hour into this a week. This is not something that's quite as time consuming as many think that it might be, but they come out of it. And because they have gone into it with a goal, with an intention, with something that they want to get out of it, I have seen literally just miracles happen. I mean, people that were fully agoraphobic and wouldn't leave their home, and all of a sudden they are. People that are so socially anxious, it's affected them in their jobs and social, in all these different facets. Just remarkable. And, you know, a couple days, they're better. By the time they see me a few weeks later, it's like they're a whole different person. And you get what you get so much more out of it, depending on what you put into it. So yes, going into it with intention is absolutely key.
You're listening to the Psychedelic Report.
Well, first off, raise your hand if you have ever consciously, like you've been aware of yourself ever entering full on into a meditative or psychedelic state before. Raise your hand. All right, keep your hand up if you've done that with ketamine. Well, that's a pretty decent number. So put your hand up again if you did it with ketamine in a clinical context versus a recreational context. If you had recreational context, put your hand down. Okay. So only a few people have actually had the kind of experience that we're talking about, which is that really like handheld delivery experience. Right. So could you tell, because ketamine is probably one of the most widely recreationally abused psychedelic medicines right now, or medicines in general that induces any kind of psychedelic states other than cannabis. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the kind of work that we do and what you're doing with WonderMed compared to the way people are recreationally using ketamine? Because the recreational use of ketamine is not necessarily going to get you the kind of life transforming
Right.
results that we see in the therapeutic setting.
Right. Well, the recreational use is really for its utility as a dissociative. So people are using it to dissociate from what they're feeling, to maybe feel, very relaxed in the moment, but it's fleeting. And so just like if you're taking the medication, even if it's prescribed, but not with intention, then, is nice in the moment, but it doesn't really have that long-term effect. But in general, if you're speaking about recreational use versus medical use, I mean, there's so much that's different there. I mean, first of all, when you go in and you're evaluated, are you even a candidate for this? What are some potential drug interactions or concerns that we might need to talk about before you even start? Your dose is tailored to you, your frequency. You can meet with a therapist, you can meet with a guide. Like, we just help you so much more than if you're just using it on the street. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but there's definitely a big difference.
Yeah, you definitely did. And I think it goes back to that you're helping people hone an intention, right? You're not saying, hey, you came in here feeling like all wild and crazy and we're just going to give you medicine right away. There's like a process of helping guide people to figuring out what they want to get out of the experience so they can actually have that.
Exactly. It is not passive. So our traditional medications, like you just take a medicine every day, it's a passive experience, right? You're not putting any effort into that or putting any intention or trying to really change the wiring in your brain or the way that you're, perceiving your anxiety, your depression, your trauma, all these things. So yes, it's a totally different experience.
And one of the things that's always interested me so much about ketamine as a medicine in particular is that, especially for those of you who have never experienced it, ketamine it's used in very low doses. It's extremely safe. It's been used for over 70 years in humans. And it was first used to evacuate wounded soldiers from the battlefield in Vietnam, I think maybe even Korea, because it dissociates you from pain very quickly. We use it at much lower doses in the depression and anxiety and mental health world, but we get people just to the level of what we would consider to be generally like a psychedelic state. And one thing that's always fascinating about this experience is how similar it feels and we have to do these experiences in our own ketamine clinical training. And one of the things that fascinated me was how similar it feels to the experiences that I've done with breathwork and meditation, mindfulness practices, particularly certain kinds of slow, deep breath work, like you were almost started walking us through earlier. And the best way that I can describe the experience is what we would call in psychotherapy, it's like it facilitates an entry into quiet observer mind. So it's like you're able to just kind of sit there and watch yourself and watch your thoughts go by and not judge them and just observe without judgment, which we are trained to do for our patients for years, but we are terrible doing it for ourselves notoriously. And that's why the breathing techniques are so interesting, because these are the practices that in the ketamine and psychedelic world we call integration practices. They're what we do in between all of our psychedelic medicine sessions or our psychedelic sessions of any kind. It's what we do to sustain the benefits, to integrate a disintegrated self, right? And so can you talk a little bit about the observer mind, sort of the importance of listening in these states from a healing perspective, especially because I think we often forget that listening itself is so therapeutic.
I mean, meditation by its very nature is a practice of deep listening. Where it's an intimacy with our human experience. And that I say that not to sound poetic in any way, but it genuinely is. We're dropping into our senses and we're listening. What are our senses coming into contact with right now? Like for some of you sitting out here, like, are you feeling hot? Are you feeling cold? You're hearing different sounds come and go. Some are obvious, some are less obvious. So listening and paying attention is our experience. And I think this is especially important these days with the attention economy, and how we place our attention, how we are simply noticing how distracted we are. And you alluded to this a little earlier on. Our ability to notice that we're distracted is the first stage of meditation. The second stage is to come back, right? And so that takes a lot of attention, takes a lot of awareness, and it takes a lot of practice. And so we continue to do it over and over again. And it's simple, right? The practice of meditation is actually quite simple, but it's not easy. And it's interesting. I only really learned about this today, or about a week ago, actually, when
the Apollo?
Yeah, the Apollo. And I was telling Dave, like, I've always been, not always, I've been teaching meditation for 15 years. So the first, I think, 10 years of my life, people have been telling me about all these different wearables and devices to help me get into a meditative state. Like, well, why do you need that for? And it wasn't actually until the pandemic where I realized that there was this, I'm going a little off topic. There was this real attachment for me for the purity of meditation practice, the purity of these breathwork practices, the purity of lineage and all that. And then I literally saw friends die during the pandemic. I literally saw, my daughter be struck with social anxiety. And it was a moment where I realized we don't have time. For me anyway, and that's really why Open was born. We don't have time to almost debate this with ourselves. We have to really go into action. And so these practices help us first bear witness to our experience, and then they actually help us take steps towards changing our experience. And the integration of wearables is so exciting for me for that reason. We can go from the witness into taking steps and taking action, and psychedelics also play such a beautiful part within that as well.
Yeah, and it reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, which is that not all of us learned this growing, right? And when you're talking about these practices, especially these ancient practices of attention control and mindfulness and awareness and self-awareness training, yes, we have very strong entire sections of our brains that are evolved to do those things. But if you don't use it, you lose it, right? We have to train our brains and our bodies to enter these states. And then fast forward to, where I was sitting 10 years ago, and I'm in my early 30s and trying to figure out how to meditate. And I don't even know what the feeling that I'm trying to reach feels like.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think many of us have been in this place where we're trying to get to an experience. We're told you're supposed to get here, you're supposed to get there, because that's where the healing is, right? That's where the journey is supposed to take us. But then we find ourselves in the situation where we don't know what it feels like to get there. And then how do we strive for something? How do you shoot at a target when you don't even know where the target is?
And that really is the evolution of wellness that integrates psychedelics too, which is really, it's exciting to be a part of that and to learn more about it. I've spent 15 years and there are days I'm like, am I doing it right? Have I got it? I go and on retreat, Vipassana retreats. I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like. But then, within a week, I'm back in Venice. I'm walking down the boardwalk. I'm like, I've lost it.
Yeah, right.
I've lost it. So it's
glow kind of fades.
Yeah. Right? And I'm someone that's deeply invested in this. I'm someone that studies this, practices this, talks about it with friends. And even I kind of, at times, feel like, oh, am I doing it right? So it has to evolve. Mindfulness has to evolve. And the way it is evolving, it's interesting at times. It's not always evolving to be the best version of itself. But when there's people that are trusted in this field, when science and spirituality meet in a very authentic way, it's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why I was so excited about ketamine and the work we're doing with psychedelic medicine, and why we developed Apollo was because, again, we need all the help we can get right now, right? And even the best of us, even those of us who have been practicing these techniques for decades, we often still struggle to get into those states on a regular basis. And we're challenged, right? We're all being challenged to quite a degree right now. And, we talk a lot about in teaching, we talk about top-down learning, which is the traditional way of learning. You go to your doctor or you sit in a classroom and you say, I want to learn something. And your doctor, your teacher says, okay, this is what you do. And they give you instructions and you go do it. That still requires us to seek, to find the target and to aim at it and to shoot without knowing what it feels like to actually achieve, right? And to be there. And then we have the Western medicine tools and the plant medicine tools, and ketamine being, what we're working with, that gets you there. Right? Within an hour, 60 to 90 minutes, you can take this medicine in a safe environment with trained therapists, and you can get to the state of quiet observer mind and basically a very brief, timeless, peaceful bliss that is something maybe you don't even remember from your earliest days of innocent childhood, or maybe you don't remember it at all. But that in and of itself is so healing, and that we can then take it with us if we do the right practices. And for those who are not able to, or who didn't have the know-how or the education to do the breath work, or just had never understood what that feeling was like, and for those who didn't have good access to things like ketamine therapy, that was actually why we developed the Apollo technology, based on how to help give the body just a little bit of a nudge towards mindfulness and towards meditation. And for those who are wearing it, feel free to tune it to the social vibe if you haven't yet. But Anybody who's wearing the Apollo will notice that the vibrations kind of gently go up and down in a wave. And this wave is what we figured out at the University of Pittsburgh from the study of breath. And that when you study breath, the oldest form of Western study of breath is biofeedback. And biofeedback has been studying breath in the Western science model for 60, 70 years. And now we know that it works. Definitively, breath work works. Breathing actually does heal us. And it improves heart rate variability, which is the number one metric of resilience and recovery. And so in search of what could help us get there more easily, we found heart rate variability, we found breath and biofeedback, and we started to figure out you could deliver the rhythms of our ideal breathing pattern just straight to the body. And the body would say, oh, I like this. Let's do this more. And that became Apollo. And now we've shown that Apollo actually coming full circle out of this world of psychedelics and how to try to give people some of the benefits of psychedelic experiences and that feeling of embodied safety on the go is now being used in psychedelic treatments. And it's the first wearable to be used in collaboration with MAPS for integration after MDMA therapy. And it's being used in ketamine practices. And we collaborate with WonderMed and other groups to deliver Apollo before, during, and after ketamine experiences to help people drop in and feel more safe, to have the powerful transformative experiences that they are there to have, and then also to sustain them after.
You're listening to the Psychedelic Report.
And so we've been talking a lot about the interface, right, between science and spirituality. You know, there's this interesting opportunity where we see psychedelic medicines and psychedelic states that are not medicine induced, and all of these natural ancient tools coming together with technology, and now they're all being used together. You know, science and spirituality have always been well, not always, but at least in as long as I can remember, there's been a lot of challenge bringing these two disciplines to see eye to eye and sit at the same table and really understand where they meet, and that they do meet, and that healing is kind of at the center. And being in the spaces that you're in, can you talk a little bit about how you kind of navigate those challenges when you have people coming to you for ketamine therapy, you know, in the Western model? How do you approach spirituality, and how do you kind of talk to people about this kind of stuff?
It's a very good question. It's also a very loaded question. And I do have a lot of people, I will say, it's usually after the experience that we have that conversation versus before. And they come to me and they have these, you know, these crazy experiences. I've had people say they've had divine experiences. I had a patient actually say she saw an angel, and she could see the angel, she could feel the angel, and the angel lifted her anxiety off of her chest and the constriction that she was feeling, and it remained that way I spoke with her weeks after this had happened. So how do you explain that? You know, I just think that it's a really interesting marriage, honestly. And I think that they don't have to be at odds. And I think the way that I see it in my head is that there's just so much that we don't understand. Just because I don't have a fancy, you know, biomarker lab MRI study to show this is why you saw an angel and it was lifted and you feel great. You know, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And this is a fun example I like to tell people. So one of my colleagues studied astrophysics, and he likes to talk about how we, with the human, you know, brain and the human eye, we can only see 0.0035% of light. Can you believe that? So there's so much that we don't see. Does that mean it doesn't exist? You know, we can only hear 2% of sound. My dog can hear more than I can and can smell more than I can, but does that mean it doesn't exist? No, it just means that it's not tangible to us and we can't understand it. So I think that this medicine, really, the beauty in it is that it allows us to go into this subconscious space and to tap into something that we can't in our ordinary state. And honestly, this is, in my opinion, and this is why I'm so passionate about this work and making it accessible to people, in the way that we are, is because I think this is the future of psychiatry. I think this is the future of even neuroscience and kind of trying to figure out how these paths merge. And really, at the end of the day, we don't have to understand it all. It's helping people.
Yeah, agreed.
That was so beautifully said. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree with everything that you said there. And I was actually also reflecting on the early days when, you know, I'd be out at parties and someone would introduce me as, you know, he's a meditation teacher. And everyone would be like, oh shit, here we go. I'm stuck next to the meditation guy. And usually what they would say is, oh, you need to speak to my wife. Oh, you need to speak to my husband, right?
That's funny. That's what they say to me too.
Yeah. And, you know, the conversation would begin. And I'd start talking about meditation, I'd lose them. I'd see their eyes glaze over. It's like, where is this guy's harem pants? Like, what's he talking about? But then I'd also have to start talking about the prefrontal cortex and how the brain atrophies at a certain point. And then all of a sudden, their eyes would light up again and they'd be interested in talking about mindfulness and meditation. And these days it's almost, especially living in Venice, it's the opposite. Talking about science, they're like, like, tell me about where I go and all that, right? And so I genuinely feel if we're going to evolve our health and wellness, we need to understand both to a certain degree. We need to understand physiologically and from the perspective of our brain, like what is actually happening. And then we also at some point need to let that go, because we can get fixated on that, right? It can become almost another self-improvement project for us, where we start to perfect ourselves in some way. And mindfulness, and traditionally as it was taught, was not a way to perfect our experience, not a way to optimize ourselves, was a way to actually uncover all of that and to realize the perfection of life. And that, again, sounds a little esoteric as I say it, but genuinely what meditation ultimately is trying to reveal is that this moment is basically okay. Like, it's basically okay. We have the capacity to find healing. We have the capacity to navigate our challenges, our stresses. We have the capacity to deal with life just as it is. And we don't need anything else beyond this moment to do that. And so the interplay between all of our fields is so exciting for me, because I think people are also trying to move away from traditional forms of therapies that, for whatever reason, for them may not have worked. Not to say that it's bad in and of itself, but I'm an example of that. I've gone through medication and then found different ways to really become well and become healthy. And I think we're evolving to the point where we're now ready to have this conversation. And that's so exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, I think both of you mentioned something interesting, which is letting go of this idea that we have to understand every last little thing. One of the things we talk about a lot in our therapy practice is starting to become grateful for the unknown rather than fearing it, rather than worrying and spending so much time. Many of us spend so much time worrying about the things we don't know. And there's actually a lot of grace in the unknown. And we can welcome it into our lives, and with intuitive knowing, which is really this idea of just almost knowing without knowing. If anybody's heard that, right? It's like it's like an intuitive understanding that it's okay, as you were saying, that I have everything I need in this moment, but I don't necessarily need to know every little last bit about how it all works, and that's okay. And
if I could just add like a really cool story that one of my teachers once shared. It's like meditation practice when you get into some of these bliss states, that feel psychedelic, or even when you just embark on this journey of self-discovery. He said it's like falling through the sky and then realizing you have no parachute, but then also realizing that there is no floor. There is no ground, right? And for me, that's always been so beautiful to understand the psychedelic experience, understand my own mind, and also meditation, is that when we can let go of the fear, we stop trying to hold on to things on the way down, and we can just almost float, right? And the practice of, I think, psychedelics, breath work, meditation, mindfulness, so much of it is creating the conditions for us to feel safe and to know even if we hit the floor, we're going to be okay. Right. And really, that's ultimately it. Like, it's not that we're going to be perfect, but we have the resources to not be thrown around, to not lose ourselves in the experience.
Well said. And so before we take you all into your experience for the day, which we're very excited for, this will be a combination that Manoj is leading with breath and mindfulness and sound.
Yeah, I have a question actually.
Oh yeah, sure.
So what's the best setting for people to use when they're doing
for this? This would be calm. We're going to do social because we're going to about to take a little break, and then we can all mingle for a minute. And then before we come in for the session, for the sound bath meditation, everybody can set to calm, and calm vibes on the Apollo we've shown in a university trial that will hopefully be published in the next 2 quarters actually deepens access to meditative states and increases gamma coherence, which is what happens to our brains when we start to meditate. So it can help us go deeper, faster, and just ease the body into these states, which is really neat.
Another question.
Yeah.
What happens if you just want to blast off into space?
That's the one.
That's the one.
That's the one.
Cool.
And if you're
asking for a friend.
Yeah. And if you're and it's the same when you're combining it with ketamine as well. For people who use Apollo with ketamine therapy, the calm vibes, which used to be called meditation and mindfulness in our first release, deepens your experience. And the recover vibes actually just kind of even out your experience. Wow. So for those who are kind of apprehensive about dropping in, we start with recover, and that just kind of eases their nerves a little bit and helps them have a very nice, gentle experience. And then calm takes people to the next domain.
Great.
But I think just to end before we move on to our mingling and our awesome sound bath meditation coming up, I wanted to end with some ancient wisdom that's some of my favorite and very inspirational to our work with Apollo. For those of you who aren't familiar with who Apollo was, Apollo is the Greek and Roman god of the sun and has a very significant amount of symbolism in Greek and Roman culture and going all the way till today. Apollo was the god that gave the gift of medicine and healing to humanity and also gave the gift of music. Interestingly, these both came from the same god. Surprise. And on the temple of Apollo at Delphi, which is one of the oldest remaining temples of Apollo, there are many tenets that are inscribed, but there are three that are most interesting about how to live a good life. And they're called the maxims of the Temple of Apollo. And number 1 is know thyself. Number 2 is nothing to excess. Don't be greedy. Number 3 is surety brings ruin. Enter life with humble with modesty. Don't think you know before you know. Be the investigator into the unknown. And while the second two are generally easier to understand and more practical, know thyself always comes to the top as one of the more complicated things that we end up facing when we enter into deep spiritual states with medicines like ketamine. Some people may enter states where they see parts of themselves they were not aware were there with our meditation today. And I want you all to know that it's just you. Whatever comes up today is just looking for love and affection, and there's nothing to be afraid of. We're all here for you. And these experiences are about just getting to know ourselves better. And the more that we practice getting to know ourselves, the more that we practice knowing what's in here, the stronger our force field gets to all the other stuff that's going on around us that maybe we don't want in here all the time. And then that cleans us up, keeps us free flowing in our good self-healthy state. And that really creates that sense of resilience and strength within us. That is a lot of the practices that we all do together and we work on with our clients. So I just want to finish by thanking both of you so much. Can we give these two a huge round of applause, Manoj and Lauren Swanson? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for listening to The Psychedelic Report. Visit us at thepsychedelicreport.com. The Psychedelic Report was brought to you by Apollo Neuroscience and produced by Future Medicine Media. While I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor. So please don't take anything you hear on the Psychedelic Report as personal medical advice, because we don't know you. If you have questions about anything you hear on this show, please consult with your doctor.